So good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. Let me just make sure. I want to welcome everyone who's taking time to join us on this. Today's Thursday, right? My days keep running together. It's Thursday afternoon, the 7th week, I will say, of virtual school for my daughter, and us teleworking from home and being able to spend more time together during the COVID-19 pandemic, and during this unprecedented time of uncertainty. Today is April 30th, and today is the day that the governor's executive order requiring sheltering in place for statewide for all Georgians expires. And so the message that we continue to have, and I've talked with the mayors in the 8 cities in South Fulton County, and we all agree that it's still critically important to stay home, be smart, be safe, follow the science, the medical experts and the data, and the numbers are just continuing to increase daily. I believe from the 28th to the April 28th, April 29th, there are over 700 cases, new cases of COVID in the state of Georgia, 60 new deaths. And so you're talking about families being greatly impacted, losing loved ones, and just really, really needing to focus on safety. But the reality of it is that Georgia, the governor started reopening Georgia on the 24th of April, and then with the barbershop, hair salon, massage places, tattoo parlors, and the like. And then on Monday of this week, the 27th, movie theaters, as well as dine-in and restaurants was allowed to be open. And then today, if nothing happens between now at 6:34 and this evening, the shelter in place will expire statewide for all Georgians. But in the last executive order, there is a shelter in place effective May 1st through May 13th for Georgians who are 65 years or older, medically fragile, nursing home, and so persons with chronic illnesses. And so that will kick in tomorrow. So as I was thinking about what we could connect with around this week and what we could talk about, I felt like, from a people perspective, people are having to make decisions and go to work, and making those decisions are challenging at times. And so I felt like it might be helpful to have someone to come on this community conversation with Mayor Deana HolidayIngraham to talk about that, just working during COVID-19. What does that look like? What are some things to consider? And what has been some legislative changes. And so I have my dear friend, Representative Kim Schofield from District 60, who represents a part of our great city of East Point, where there's no point like East Point. And then also Representative Walensky, who I'm not sure of his district, he'll tell us in a minute, but I know he is an amazing employment lawyer and very knowledgeable around employment law. And so I'm going to turn it over to Representative Schofield to give a few words of greetings and just share with you guys for a minute. And then we'll go to Representative Walensky.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, everyone. And thank you to my colleague, Representative Mike Walensky, for being on the call. Yes, there's no point like East Point. And during this time, we at the General Assembly are really concerned about making sure that if you have to choose between going back to work, because we understand why, we want to make sure you know how. We want to make sure that you are have a safe transition back to be reintegrated back into society. Because I'm going to be very honest, the other day I had to run out for a quick second, and it was a very anxious. I was a little anxious about being integrated back into the population. So I know when it's time for even us to go back to the General Assembly, that there are going to be some barriers and new hurdles to try to get us safely in there so that we can continue to make sure that we're passing a balanced budget. So I wanted to let you know tonight, and we'll talk more, that yes, no one should ever have to choose between their health and the job that they need. So we're here to provide a buffer and to hear you. I want to hear from you your concerns tonight about how to transition to work. And so at this time, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mike Walensky.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Mayor and Representative Schofield. I I represent House District 79. It's all of Dunwoody, a little bit of Dorville, small piece of Chamblee. I grew up in Sandy Springs and I was born and raised in Georgia, so proud to be here. And thanks for having me on. I'm here today. I'm an attorney at Barrett and Farahani. I lead their injury wrongful death practice and I also do employment law. And so here I'm to help you all discuss about very briefly about employers and then mainly about employees and what can we expect and what changes have been done. On the employer side, there's been a lot of executive orders from our governor. So a lot of changes and you got to keep up to date. If you choose to reopen, make sure you're complying with not only federal regulations and CDC guidelines, but please look up the current guidelines for whatever type business you have and how that impacts you, and please keep up to date and make sure you're following those guidelines. For example, one of the guidelines for haircut places is that they have to change the gown every haircut. And I don't know too many barbers and haircut places that have that many gowns, but that's one of the guidelines. And also, if you have a business and you have employees and you've reduced even just their hours in any way or the amount of work, you must file unemployment for them. And any employer who's found in violation of that will be required to reimburse the Georgia Department of Labor. Just for a brief second, I will also say from the injury standpoint, and the standard here in Georgia is whether the owner of a property or the person visiting the property had superior knowledge, they call it, who had awareness of a hazard. So, you know, as an employer, please make sure you're keeping everybody safe, and with the COVID-19 and all of the things around it, you know, you will be seen as knowledgeable. I mean, we know with the disease, how easily it can be spread. And please protect yourself as well as others, making sure you're not doing anything with your business that could harm others. So for employees, the most questions we're getting, and I think we're all getting, is about unemployment. We're seeing record numbers of unemployment, and it's totally understandable with the climate we're in for the health and benefit of everybody. You know, this is all something we all do, and you know, as somebody said, to be a hero right now, all you need to do is stay home. So let's all be a hero. But you know, we're coming into times now where we're starting to open up, and people do have to go back to work. We have to, and based on the situation, you need to protect yourself and make sure the employer is protecting you. So under unemployment, if you're asked to go back to work, unless you have a valid reason, you must go back to work. And the number one thing we're hearing is, you know, I'm scared, I'm anxious, I'm fearful. And while that's totally understandable for everybody, under the unemployment guidelines and laws and rules, that is not something that can qualify you for unemployment. The standard for unemployment is that, in a sense, it's not your fault. I can't go work because it's not my fault. You know, if you break your ankle and you can't go to work, you breaking your ankle was not your fault. So you could qualify for unemployment for that. If you have a medical notice that says you're in a high risk group or you have severe depression and anxiety, I'm not going to say today that you would automatically qualify for an unemployment. Please, every case is very, very fact specific. So please talk to an attorney before you don't show up or don't go to work because of all of this. But the main broad standard that's held is that it's not your fault. And if you decide to not go to work, it is you, the employee's burden to show at the unemployment hearing that you have a valid reason, proof of the issue you are having and why you couldn't go to work. It could be a doctor's note, it could be a medical note, it could be many things, but each case is very fact specific, and you just want to be prepared. And in the same token, when you go to work, the employer needs to be protecting you. He needs to be following the guidelines. We're getting a lot of questions on what do I do if I show up and people are not staying 6 feet apart, or there are not, the regulations, they're not meeting the guidelines. And that's something you definitely want to talk to an attorney about. Today, I'm in my state representative role. So we're not going to give any legal advice today, but, before you do anything drastic and out of fear and concern, once again, that's totally rational and understandable. These are times where I have a 4-year-old daughter who has severe asthma. So I have friends who are social distancing and having drinks together, but I can't go. I'm not going to take that risk. And I know many people out there would do anything for their families and are doing the same thing. So, we're all being a hero together. One of the things that has been done is on the unemployment side is they have expanded. If you can qualify for unemployment, they have expanded the amount of time you can be on unemployment and the amount of pay you can get. So that is great. They did that. That was really great. The next part I'll talk about is the FFCRA. That is a federal change. It's the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. I'm not going to say that 5 times fast. And and what that does is it has expanded FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act. If you're in a company, I'm going to talk about that next. But if you qualify for FMLA, that's been expanded. But specifically here, I'm talking about paid sick leave. Under the FFCRA, to qualify for paid sick leave, well, first of all, this is only if you're in a company that has under 500 employees, so less than 500 employees. And you could be eligible for 2 weeks, 80 hours of paid sick leave, and possibly more. And there are 6 ways you can qualify under the FFCRA. The first one is you're subject to a quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. Right now, those are being reduced. And obviously right now, the executive order from the governor supersedes or takes over all of the local ones. He did not put in his order at all that, municipalities, if they choose to have stricter ones, we must follow that. No, the statewide order is the one we must follow right now. The second one is has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine related to COVID-19. So clearly, if you have been advised by a healthcare provider and you're going to tell your employer, hey, I have to stay home, make sure you have the medical records, make sure you have a doctor's note. They're going to want proof of that always. The third one is experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and is seeking a medical diagnosis. So as we know, the symptoms range from a cough to a fever. But it's not just that you have the symptoms, is that you're in the process of seeing a doctor to see, what's going on. And once again, if you're going to let your employer know about that, obviously you would need to show that you're going through medical treatment. The next one is caring for an individual subject to a quarantine or isolation order, or if you just switched, oh, okay, we got this popping up, great. Or that is, or that they're, taking care of somebody who's been told to quarantine by a healthcare provider. So pretty much if you have a person in your household or family who is in quarantine, who is in isolation, and you need to take care of them, that's the reason. And yeah, you can see in the middle part what leave must be provided. That's what we're talking about right now. You can get up to 12 weeks of paid sick leave. The first is actually at a higher pay than the first 2 weeks are at a different pay than the second 10. And the last one is you can say, you need paid sick leave under the FFCRA when you're caring for a child whose school has closed. Now, we must keep in mind that while schools are closed right now, at the end of May, I'm sure in East Point and Fulton County and City of Atlanta, those schools are out for summer. So once schools are out for summer, we can't say they're closed anymore. But for the time being, if you have a child at school who is closed and you are need to take care of them, that is a reason to get paid sick leave, but there is an exception for that one. The exception for that one is if there's a company that has less than 50, if a company has less than 50 employees, they can say that your job is vital to their company. And there's 3 criteria they have to meet. It's not just they're saying it, but they have to prove it. But if they show that they're less than 50 employees and they meet those 3 qualifications, then you can't use that caring for a child to stay at home. That's just a conversation you have to have with your employer. The last one is experiencing any other substantially similar condition specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. I'll tell you a secret, I have not read what has been specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So if it comes up, if you're having similar conditions, please look that up, talk to a doctor, talk to an attorney, and make sure that what you're telling your employer is acceptable under the standard. And the last federal, and just keep in mind, so here in Georgia, we have pretty much no state laws dealing with employment. We do have state law dealing with race discrimination, but that's about it. No disability, not even sexual harassment, and all of these other protected classes, which is age, gender, sexuality, all of those. So everything that we're talking about are federal. And Rep. Schofield and we're talking about down the road, we were discussing that we can be the top state for business and still protect our employees. Those aren't opposite from each other. Those are actually the same. The best businesses we know take care of their employees. So the next federal guideline I'm talking about is the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act. And an employer is covered by this if they have 50 or more employees. And it can be as many, just that they have to have more than 50. And in order to be eligible as an employee, first of all, you're an employee in that company. You've worked for that company for at least 12 months. You've worked in the last 12 months. So, I had a person who took off 2 months in 12 months. Well, no, it has to be in the last 12 months, you have worked 1,250 hours. And the location where you are has at least 50 employees within 75 miles. So that goes back to the 50 number. They have to have at least 50. So if you qualify under FMLA, and this is where you need to take time off of work because you are seeking medical treatment. You are actually in the process of medical treatment. Or the other actually way you could be under FMLA is if you have an injury that is only going to put you, that you're only going to be out of work for a set amount of time. And it's less than 3 months. It has to be less than 3 months, usually less than 2 months, but talk to an attorney about that. But if you are going to be out for a set period of time, or you need to treat for a sickness of any kind, you can qualify for FMLA if you meet that criteria. Being an attorney and a politician now, I guess you could call me. I don't know. I'm just a guy from used to be North Fulton, but now I'm in DeKalb County. I could talk for 30 more minutes, but I can't see people, but I'm sure people are falling asleep. But I can say that each of these situations and all of the situations when it comes to employee and employer, they are very fact specific. There is no two cases that are like. Every situation is a little different. Talk to your leaders about what's going on. Talk to an attorney and just make sure that you are protected. I hope everybody who has to go back to work goes to safe environments, that they're meeting the regulations, and they don't have to encounter situations where they have to report a problem and then figure out what to do from there. And it sounds like everybody's saying the same thing, but since the beginning of this, I've been saying be safe, be strong, be grateful, and stay home. So with that, I'll pass it back.
Well, thank you so much, Rep. Walensky. And I think it's important for, my goal always with these conversations is to empower and equip people to be residents, to be informed, engaged, and empowered to really be able to make their own informed decisions. So I appreciate you sharing that. The one thing I wanted to bring up for you to just touch on really quick is there are businesses that are open, but there are some requirements in order for them to remain open. And if you could kind of talk or share with us, did I do that right? Share with us kind of that, the perspective around these are the things that are required. It's not that you're just open and right. Can do whatever you like, right? There's some things that are required of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's 100% true. We can't just, we're not going back to normal yet. Um, while the governor said we're in a sense reopening, and as you're showing here, there are a lot of guidelines that need to be met. Um, prohibiting gatherings, um, screening and evaluating workers, making sure that the workforce is social distancing. In a lot of companies, that's very difficult. So if people are going to meet these guidelines, I would expect at this time that um, when businesses open, they're still going to have much fewer employees. I mean, um, and actually, it's also mandatory that every business who opens has these guidelines and posters like that posted so everybody's aware. So we're not back to normal yet. If I were to guess, it's going to be at least 2 more months. So the key, is how do you open in a safe way? And at this time, meeting those regulations and guidelines can be very difficult.
And I think that's what a lot of employers are finding the challenge of even being able to open to ensure safety. And so the great news is that there are employers who value the safety of their employees as well as themselves and understand how serious this pandemic is and, just where we are from a science and data perspective. And so, I can imagine and I was a former small business owner myself, the balancing of knowing that you need to be open and I heard Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi earlier today say, it's between life and livelihood, right? So you
That's good.
of making sure that you're staying well, healthy, and safe, but there's also a livelihood consideration that small business owners have to make. And, so it is good to see that so many of them understand the seriousness of this and are having, and I think they're coming up with reopening plans, right? Understand the need for phasing that in and the importance of science and data. Um, we have one question. If someone in your family has COVID-19, are you supposed to quarantine with them, giving its extreme likelihood you would carry as well? And so that's kind of one of those medical type questions. And I can try to take a stab at it from what I've heard, and either of you can chime in as well. But if you have a family member who has COVID-19, one thing is there are a number of testing sites that are expanding and increasing in the state, and as well as in the county. In Fulton County, we now have one at Wolf Creek Amphitheater in the city of South Fulton. There's one that's opening at Greenbrier Mall, and also others will be coming online. There's a mobile testing unit as well. And so, if you're symptomatic, you should definitely be getting tested. As far as quarantining, again, it depends on the level of exposure. If you're experiencing symptoms, what I've heard from people, and I've known people who were exposed earlier on, they quarantined themselves in another part of the house from the people who had not actually tested positive or maybe even been exposed. So Rep. Walensky or Rep. Schofield, that's kind of my knowledge of that I've learned right through all of these different webinars and calls and information that I've been reading about. Do either of you have any perspective around that?
So I would just say, I mean, it's a matter, there's some things are just common sense. That if you knew, if beyond, let's just take away it for a minute. But if you knew someone was sick, what would your level of change have to be? You wouldn't necessarily have them around you, but they would be self-quarantined. You would not necessarily be sitting in the same room. Same thing with COVID, only we know how serious this disease is. So you self-isolate and you put them in another part of the house. It depends on, the faster we can get tested, the faster that we can self-quarantine and let it run its course, and you practice some safe distancing, then the faster this disease can move forward. There have been some people that it's only been a matter of 5 days before this COVID passed. So it is the degree of what the exposure is to the disease but it also is the let's get you isolated and allow your body to do what it needs to do to process this. Yes, if it's worse, you get to a doctor, you see a doctor, you get everything that you need to do, but let's just practice some common sense rules. I wouldn't if someone was sick. You always tell people when they're sick, oh, don't bring your child around me if they're sick. Well, we're on a different level. We know that this is real, it's dangerous. Let's practice self-containing, self-isolating, self-quarantining right now. That's the best way to do this. I do have a question for you, Rep, but I know you want to.
Yeah, I'll answer. My two pieces about that is, I see this as a airborne form of chicken pox that affects the respiratory system. That there's a reason when a child has chicken pox, they don't go to school because it's highly contagious. We're in that same situation, but the difference is this is airborne. Simply breathing and touching your face, and then you breathe it in. But the other thing that's important when you have a family member or somebody you've been around that has it is, there was a test done, and there's been a lot of science telling us, but 80% of people that have it are asymptomatic, meaning they don't have symptoms. So if somebody that you've been near or live with has it, you can go, I think it's 2 weeks, 14 days, with having it and never showing any symptoms. So it's not about how you are doing. It's now that you've been around it, if you go around and share with a bunch of people and you got 10 other people now walking around for 2 weeks who may not show symptoms, who are spreading it, that's how this is getting worse and worse. Because once it goes from asymptomatic to symptomatic, meaning somebody caught it and now they're having severe respiratory issues, that's the problem. And we're trying to, you heard it from the beginning, flatten the curve. And we do that by, if you think you've been near it, staying home and taking care of somebody with COVID-19 is one of the things under the FFCRA. So if you're, you could get paid sick leave for that if your employer qualifies.
And I just got clarification on the question. It seems like from the perspective of if someone in your family has to self-quarantine because they're positive, then can that be, it seems like a reason not to go to work?
Yes.
Under unemployment.
Well, is under unemployment, see, that's a discussion with your employer.
The position is a high likelihood that they might be infected. So should they also
workplace
from an unemployment legality perspective?
Right. From a legality standpoint, if as an employer gets a call from an employee and they say, hey, my wife, who I am around all the time, just got diagnosed with COVID-19, you would think the employer would say, for the safety of the rest of my employees, you need to stay home. This is where the facts and the conversations or emails and specific things that are said, how it's being handled, you need to talk to an attorney about the specific case. But would it qualify under unemployment? If that's a complicated one. It would go, what kind of job are you doing? Are you around other people? How often? What are you touching? What are you breathing? Are you high risk? It just leads to so many questions. So, each case is so fact specific. You need to know 20 to 40 different things to understand a question like that. But I hope that doesn't happen.
And I think one of the things too is, as employees or workers, people working during the COVID-19 pandemic, the CDC guidelines are recommending face masks and gloves and those things. The employers are required to provide them, I believe, under the governor's executive order, but have your own just in case, right? And especially if you may be in a situation and being in the home with someone who may either have been exposed or has that, and if your employer, it becomes that life and livelihood dichotomy that Nancy Pelosi mentioned earlier today, right? It's, if you have the conversation with your employer, and again, Representative Lindsay can't give legal advice right now, but if you have a conversation with your employer, as he said, an employer should say, well, you should, be home with your family member and, take care of your health. But if that doesn't happen and it becomes a life or livelihood situation for you, I think you always have to remember when you're away from your home to make sure you're following the CDC guidelines and make sure you're doing everything while you are out to protect yourself, because You may not have it just because someone in your house has it. Maybe you've been they've been isolated or whatever has happened. But if you go out if you go to the job without anybody in your house having it, you could potentially be exposed if you're not following the CDC guidelines.
And you're the carrier. So I want to go back on the guidelines and your protective personal equipment, making sure, and it's so important. Yes, the employers are supposed to have them, but please make sure that you're carrying that stuff with you. Touching door handles, you are pushing the button in an elevator. They're the things that we do that we don't realize that we could be, that these germs are everywhere. Yes, it is airborne, but it is just the simple things that we don't pay attention to. When you're around the areas with your coworkers, you're in the bathroom with somebody at the same time. I just want us to be really clear that you have to protect yourself and protect your space right about now. People with pre-existing conditions, as many of you know, I live with lupus. So it is very a tough balance for me to be around people at this stage because it's airborne. And so if you have a pre-existing condition, and although you don't have to disclose what your condition is within the workplace, at least make sure that you have documentation from your doctor should your need call for that you have to be home, or that you don't feel safe, or there is some level of triggers for your disease. You've got to make sure that you're documenting everything. And the question that I have for you, Representative Walensky, and it's not giving legal advice, but what happens if you see that your employer is not practicing these issues or really protecting you? If you notice that there's not the safe distancing, what should an employee do so that they don't lose their job, but at the same time, sometimes we find ourselves being caught between being a whistleblower and having to just leave your job. What do you do?
Yeah, I think you definitely talk to an attorney, and I do think you need to report it. I'm not sure at this point whether you report to OSHA or a state agency, but you should report it to your employer and let them know what's going on and give them an opportunity to fix it. The hope was they didn't know, or they're trying to do 30 other different things, that this one wasn't at the top of their list. Everything needs to be at the top of the list, but maybe hopefully you report it and the conversation goes well and they have time to fix it and they fix it as quickly as possible. But if something's going on based on how bad, you definitely should talk to an attorney. And then the other question is, if you have reported it and they're not fixing it, could that qualify for unemployment? It could, based on the facts. But once again, every case is so different. It's definitely talk to an attorney before you do it. But I think that would be a pretty good example, especially if you are high risk or have a family member who's high risk, that wouldn't be your fault to be, if you couldn't go to work because it was a terribly unsafe condition. But once again, talk to an attorney before doing anything like that.
And I'd also add the executive order, this one it's quite lengthy, 26 pages. It does provide for local law enforcement to be able to enforce the executive order. And so even with when we had just our own emergency ordinances in place, what I share with East Point is call our East Point non-emergency number. Know that people aren't, their businesses or places that are not following the executive order, which includes the CDC guidelines around social distancing and having hand sanitizing stations. Like, report that to East Point non-emergency number, and that number is 404-761-2177. Again, that's 404-761-2177. That's the City of East Point non-emergency number. Call and share that. You can email me and I'll forward the report on as well. I can be reached at mayor, MAYOR, at eastpointcity.org, mayor at eastpointcity.org. And our office number is 404-270-7091. 204-270-7091. I've received concerns, I'll call them, from people who are like, I was just out at this place and people are too close and they're not social distancing and this is happening. And so I make that call and we go out and our officers will go out and check to see, and just give it a friendly reminder initially of the guidelines are in place. This is what is required. But the executive order does give the local authority the ability to cite. And I believe it's on the third citation, it can be closed. So, and I think there are fines along with it as well. So make sure you have that East Point 9 emergency number, email to my office and phone number, and just let us know. Because I can assure you, and I've said it time and time again, your health, welfare, and safety of our residents is our top priority. At all times, and especially during this unprecedented time of uncertainty, teamwork makes the dream work. We can't all be everywhere, but if we get the information and we know, we can then go out and respond. Check and see if there are any more questions, any other comments or remarks from either Rep. Walensky or Rep. Schofield.
No, I mean, I echo exactly what you said. We are here, whether it's state or whether it's local, we're here for your safety. We can only be as effective for you when you work together with us. And so we're asking you to practice safe distancing. We're asking you to shelter. You don't have to shelter in place, but stay home. If you don't have to go to work, please stay home. Allow us to do what we can for you. We have, Mike and I, we've talked about all the bills that we have placed and are looking to put forward for making sure that we have employee and protecting employee rights. We want to make this the best place to do business, but we want to make sure that the employees, the people that go to work to keep these businesses going, are protected, their rights. But we want to make sure that what we do and what we say for you is helping you, but you've got to help us help you. We've screamed, we've begged, I've cried, I've pleaded, I've prayed. Listen, to stay home. We're doing this for you. We love businesses. We know it's important that you need your livelihood. Every small business, every medium size, we know that, but we need the people and the workers to be healthy to help you. So help us. All of us here together tonight are for you, but we want you to be healthy, and we need you to make decisions that align with guidelines and protocols. Let the data, let the medical data speak, because the last thing I want to do is get a call about another person that has lost someone due to some kind of it's not negligence, but it's just that we could have prevented this, but people are not listening. I as much as everybody on this phone, want to be outside. I want to be able to walk freely, and that can happen if you work with us now. Let's get we're not past phase one. We know it's going to hit again, but we need you to do what you need to do in place to help us. So that's my plea. That's my ask. Help us help you.
I'll just say thank you for having me on. It's great to see that East Point is in amazing hands, and I was just honored to speak to everybody. And if anybody needs me, y'all can look me up and reach me anytime. And thank you again. And please stay home. And if you have to go to work, work hard, be safe, and go back home.
Thank you so much to Rep. Schofield and Rep. Walensky. I appreciate you taking time, making time to join this community conversation or have this community conversation with me for the residents of East Point around working during COVID. I will definitely say that we are prioritizing your health, welfare, and safety, and we ask you to continue to put your health, welfare, and safety first by staying at home and following the guidelines. And if you do have to go out, right? And the shelter in place, if it's not reinstated for all of Georgians, Just because a piece of paper isn't there that's signed by the governor saying that you have to stay home, doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It just means that if you have to leave your house for essential services or businesses or, to work, that when you do, you are following the guidelines. You're wearing a mask, you have gloves, you are washing your hands for at least 20 seconds, hand sanitizer, like those best practices that CDC shared from the very beginning. And now I've added on to those. Make sure we're doing that, right? Because the reality, this is what we know. We will have to reopen at some point, right? At some point we will reopen. But to the representatives' perspective or what they shared, it has to be phased, and most importantly, it has to be safe. And right now, with the number of cases continuing to escalate in the state, the number of deaths, the number of families that are losing loved ones, I mean, this is a really serious healthcare issue. And so we want to make sure that you are aware of the rights and concerns and things under the act as it relates to working during this time, and understand that it is a very fact specific, very practical, one-on-one, what's happening at your job with you and your employer situation. But the empowerment of all of this is having the knowledge and being informed about the guidelines and about ways to protect yourself and others, so that if you do have to make that decision between life and livelihood, that you prioritize your life and make sure when you're going out for your livelihood that you have protected yourself with a mask, gloves, and sanitizing. And so I understand that this is impacting people in different ways. And, I really wanted to approach this from a people perspective, from the workers, for what it's like to have to go work during COVID, and what that means. And even if you're there, how can you still protect yourself? How can you still place your life above all, right? And do all that you can to ensure and protect your welfare, health, and safety. And so we're partnering with you to do that. It definitely remains our top priority. And we are doing all that we can to help us get through this. Teamwork makes the dream work. And I can assure you that we will get through this together. So please stay well, stay healthy, be safe, be smart, be safe, stay home, and God bless. Thank you so much.
Stay healthy. Good night.
Good night.